Let's talk a little bit about snack, maybe quality and also snack timing on the impact on body composition.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done quite a bit of research on snacking. Firstly, looking at snacking habits, because I think this is really important, because I think snacking is one of the single simplest dietary strategies that we can implement to improve our health. And that's because on average, we get between 20 to 25% of our calories from snacks. So that's a huge amount of our energy. A quarter of our energy is actually coming from snacks. The other important thing around snacking is generally it's under our own self-control. So for many people, what they have for lunch might be dictated by where they're working that day. What they're having for dinner might be dictated by what their kids, so in my instance, my fussy kids will eat. But snacking is under my control. And I think, therefore, given that it accounts for a quarter of calorie intake, given that it's under most people's self-control, I think that it's a really important strategy we can use to improve people's health. And what our research showed is that if you snack on healthy snacks, that it can improve your health. So we did a clinical trial, for example, where we had people who were randomly allocated to either consume the typical UK, US snacks, very similar to the snacks that you see in many populations, or consume almond nuts, so or what we would consider to be a healthy snack. And they were asked to have 20% of their energy as either the typical UK, US snacks or as almond snacks. And we told them keep everything else the same. Don't change anything else. Just change what you're snacking on. We did recruit people that are typical of us Brits or Americans, so people who did typically snack. And what we found was at the end of the 6-week period where we had modified either the typical UK snack or the almond snacks, at the end of the 6-week period, we found that those who were snacking on healthy snacks, in this case almonds, had significant improvements in a whole host of different health outcomes. And importantly, when we looked at blood vessel function, this equated to a 30% predicted risk reduction in cardiovascular disease.
What? That
30%.
is incredible.
That's after 6 weeks, and that's just changing your snacks. And that's because most people are snacking on unhealthy snacks. Most people are snacking on snacks that are higher in salt, higher in saturated fat, higher in refined carbohydrates, higher in sugar than what is recommended, and typically very low in fiber. And so they're a really easy switch to make. What we've also seen from the Zoe Predict research that we've done that looked in over 1,000 people at snacking habits and looked at one point in time, so cross-sectionally, how snacking habits relate to different health outcomes. We also see that if you're snacking on healthy foods versus snacking on unhealthy foods, as you would guess, it's associated with improvements in a whole host of different health outcomes. So it's associated with a better body composition, a better blood lipid profile, so cholesterol, triglycerides, etc., better insulin control, better levels of inflammation, better gut microbiome, etc. What we also found, which is a question that I don't think has ever been properly answered before, is that the frequency of snacking wasn't important. So there's this idea by some people that, we should all return to the traditional pattern of eating where we just have breakfast, lunch and dinner. That becoming these nations of grazers, where on average we know in many countries we're having 2 to 3 additional eating events on top of our breakfast, lunch and dinner. So we're having like 6 eating events on average as a population throughout the day. That this might be bad for us because we're constantly exposing ourselves to food. We're not giving our metabolism a rest. We're not giving our microbiome a rest. What our research showed, as long as you're snacking on healthy foods, the frequency of snacking doesn't seem to matter, except if you're snacking late at night. And this was really critical. We see that over 50% of people snack after 6 o'clock, 30% of people snack after 9 o'clock at night. And what we found was people who were snacking after 9 o'clock at night, even if they were healthy snacks, had higher BMI, higher levels of inflammation, higher level of blood lipids, higher blood pressure, etc. And so this kind of fits in with our growing understanding anyway in the nutrition community around chrononutrition, which is the timing of eating. So I think the top line on snacking is, look, I think that if you are a snacker, I wouldn't say start snacking, but I would say if you are a snacker, great, use it as a way to improve the healthfulness of your diet. Know that it can have significant impacts on improving your overall health. but avoid snacking after 9 o'clock at night.
All right. So just some parameters here. Snacking, would you say like a total calorie intake of snacking is maybe no more than, what would you say, 300 calories for like what would be like what defines a snack versus a meal?
So there's actually no definition globally accepted regarding a snack. Some people talk about snacking in terms of what it is the person's consuming, i.e. is it some crisps or is it a bar of chocolate? Other people refer to it as an eating event between a main meal. Typically, the accepted definition now is that it's an eating event between a main meal. But again, there's no cutoff, i.e. something that's above 50 calories is a snack. There's no clear definition on that.
Okay. So it's some type of food event in between a main meal.
Yep.
And maybe just as an action item for the listeners. So we've talked about healthy versus unhealthy snacks.
Yep.
So, and you've said a couple of examples of unhealthy, and redirect me here if I've misinterpreted it. But like something like a crisp or a chocolate bar, these would be, just naked, just sort of by themselves, maybe would be considered unhealthy. Would you agree with that or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think many of the foods that we typically think of as snacks, we would consider unhealthy. So crisps, chocolate bars, pastries, sweets, candies, those kind of things. Absolutely. They're high in refined carbohydrates, they're high in sugar, low in fiber. So on their own, yes, we would consider them unhealthy snacks.
Yeah, and it's usually the carb-fat combo. It's usually when they're high carb, high fat, right?
Yep.
Which are things that don't typically occur very often in nature anyway. Okay, so just on the flip side of that then, so we can all say, okay, candies and bonbons and the chips and the cookies and the crackers, all the stuff, not good. What are some examples of healthy snacks? So you've mentioned the almonds. Give us a couple of examples, a couple of action items, and maybe just to think about this in terms of layering it on with the food matrix that we've been talking about as well. Is it whole almonds with a whole apple or some other variation? What are some examples from your literature and some of the recommendations maybe from Zoe in terms of what a healthy snack might be or might look like?
So I think the ultimate healthy snack is a mixture of seeds and nuts, and actually getting a mixture of different types of nuts, different types of seeds, because every nut, every seed has a different chemical makeup, has different micronutrients, has different fibers. And we know that the diversity of fibers, the diversity of bioactive chemicals, etc., is so important. So I'd say that should be the foundation for people who can consume nuts. I know that many people have nut allergy, people who can consume seeds. Having them in their whole form is absolutely great. It will keep you full for longer. But nut butters also are great. Nut butters spread on, rye bread or something, a whole grain is also good for us. Obviously, fruit is great for us. It might not keep you as full for as long. So I think trying to select a snack that has a balance of nutrients, just like you would for a main meal, that has an adequate amount of protein and healthy fats in it and fiber is really important. And the other thing I think is definitely that we can also think about is having snacks that we might not necessarily typically think of as a snack. So things like a hard-boiled egg, that's a great snack to have if you're if it's accessible, i.e. you're working at home and, you can have one in the fridge ready to go, for example. These kind of things that maybe you wouldn't typically think of, I think are also great. So also thinking of kind of almost mini meals, or even having leftovers from, if it's a healthy meal that you've got in the fridge and you really need that mid-morning snack because you are someone like myself, I need to snack. So thinking a little bit outside the box of what a typical snack would be. If you're snacking on the go, that's where I think having around nuts or seeds or fruit, a little pot of nut butter, that kind of thing, is also really good to have on the go.
I love beef jerky.
Okay, that's not so great.
It's not so great. Okay, so I love beef jerky when I'm traveling because it takes me forever to get through the bag because it's so hard to chew, and it's higher in protein. And it's okay, so maybe the salt is not the best, but I find that the beef jerky kind of keeps me satiated. It's not perfect, but for traveling, like you can usually find beef jerky in little kiosks, like where they're selling the chips and the cookies and the crackers. And then I'm like, okay, so if I want my protein, beef jerky is usually what I go to. But you don't think that that's a great option?
So we don't have beef jerky in the UK, which is interesting. No, I think there's some retailers you could find it in, but it's certainly not like it is in North America where it's, where the snack section is. But I think that the evidence around processed meat, and I would put beef jerky in that category, I think regarding links with colorectal cancer, with heart disease, is quite strong. Now, I would say everything in moderation, and as long as you're not snacking on it every day, I think in moderation it's absolutely fine.
I'm not having like pounds of beef jerky every day. It's like when I'm on a plane going to Heathrow, or I'm on a plane going wherever, and I'm hungry and I need a snack. Usually that's what I'll go to.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a great example of how having a mixture of fat, but most importantly also protein, improves our satiety, so improves our fullness. And yet, if you were to go for a refined carbohydrate instead, it would also not be the healthiest option, but also you would feel really hungry very quickly later.
Yeah, and that's sort of why I typically, when I'm traveling, I try to, again, not perfect, but I try to up my protein wherever I can. Because I do find when you travel specifically, this is where a lot of people struggle, because it's so easy to find the combo of the high fat and the high carb when you're in those little convenience stores at the airport, or, you're driving and you stop off at a rest stop or whatever. It's very easy to find these like processed foods that give you that sort of bliss point. It's like the high fat, the high carb stuff. So beef jerky, interesting that it's not very prominent I wonder if that's true for Europe in general. And I wonder if that's just like a North American cultural thing. I don't know. It's a very interesting observation that you make, that it's not really available in the UK. But that is usually my go-to, because you can always find it. I don't have to pre-pack. I mean, I typically will try to I'll bring some macadamia nuts. That's like my favorite nut to bring, or some beef sticks, that kind of thing. I love the hard-boiled egg option. If your coworkers are fine with sulfur containing foods.
Or cheese. Cheese is another great one.
Yeah.
That, is really healthy for us. And there's this myth, one of the big myths around dairy being so bad for us because it raises our cholesterol. Well, actually, fermented dairy like cheese and yogurt, for people who have normal cholesterol, it doesn't raise your cholesterol, obviously in moderation. So
Sure.
Cheese is another great snack. That doesn't smell like eggs.
Yeah, it doesn't smell like eggs. But what I was going to say is, you can make an egg salad. You can make an egg salad, right? And you can put some mayo in there. So now you have like the protein, you get the choline and everything from the yolk, and then you're getting maybe or some olive oil, let's say, and you're adding a little bit of fat on top of that. You can throw in some celery or whatever you're putting in the salad in the mix, and then you sort of can. What am I trying to say? You're masking the sulfur that smell, that like pleasant smell, or that unpleasant smell that people might complain about with hard-boiled eggs as well. There's always a way.